We are. Um, Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this CTTR session on a Friday afternoon, 1st of November, in the wonderful year 2024. We are talking today very centrally about Kazuo Ishiguro. I'll introduce a number of speakers in a second. Um, but first, I need to kind of introduce myself. My name is Sebastian Groes, Professor of English Literature at the University of Wolverhampton. I lead the Centre for Transnational and Transcultural Research. And one of the things that we do in this centre is to lead the digital research group. And I will go into that in more detail in a second. First of all, I just like to say that I'm really pleased with the attendance, and it's such a global attendance as well. Really lovely. I think people from Canada and Japan and also from Romania. So really, really wonderful and not completely surprising given that we're talking about Kazuo Ishiguro, who is of course, has such a global appeal. So what we'll do today is to talk about the language, the style of Ishiguro. We've got two wonderful speakers from the University of Sheffield, Dr. Sara Whiteley, who is in English literature and language at the University of Sheffield. She focuses on stylistics, cognitive poetics and discourse analysis. And with her is Tino Oudesluijs, her partner in crime, on a project that investigates the language of Kazuo Ishiguro in new ways. So I think what we're doing today is to kind of understand how different methodologies, different tools, computational tools, for instance, can shed new light into how literary style works. And it's something, of course, that at the University of Wolverhampton we are preoccupied with in the sense that Novel Perceptions, an ASRC-funded project, is attempting to understand how we can use computational methodologies to understand the literary style and literary quality of novels. Okay, there are also some people from the Computational Literary Studies UK group here, so welcome. We did a fantastic training school a while ago. And I also see that some of the partners on the Unreal project, which is a Daiwa-funded project that we run in Japan, are also here. So welcome, and thank you very much for your attention and your interest in taking the time to be here today. In a week's time, the 8th of November is quite a special day because Kazuo Ishiguro will turn 70. So there will be some celebrations in Japan, in London. So it's really wonderful for Ishiguro to reach his milestone. And we're talking about, I guess, language and literary style, but also how people work, how writers write. And given that Ishiguro produces a novel every 5 years, I think we still have got a number of novels to look forward to. So, but it's a wonderful day next week, Friday. I'm just going to say something about what we're going to do. I will briefly outline some of the research that my team has done on Ishiguro's language, particularly on the remains of the day. And after that, we'll invite the team from Sheffield to introduce their project and give a sense of what they are finding in terms of Ishiguro's style, if that's okay. So I'll just briefly present some of the work that I've done with my team at Wolverhampton, if that's okay. So you should be seeing my screen, I think. If not, then let me know. Okay, that's great. So what I'm going to talk about today is partly related to the Novel Perceptions project, the project I just mentioned, investigating how we can make the novel and how we read the curriculum and the canon more inclusive. And this project has been running for about 4 or 5 years, doing a variety of things. I'll explain what we do, the methodology in a second. And just to also say that I will end this session with a call to establish a network for computational literary studies in the UK. We did a summer school or training school in May, attended by over 30 people to get trained up into computational literary studies, software, methodologies, etc. Really wonderful. And I'm glad to announce that we have been invited by Parla, the conference, which will take place at Aston University next year, to do another iteration of that training school. So if you're interested, do approach me, and then we can talk about attending that. So, related to novel perceptions was a different project. We ran this parallel to novel perceptions at the start. This is 2020, when the BBC invited us to do some analysis of their engagement project, Novels That Shaped Our World. It was slightly unfortunate that the project really kind of overlapped with the pandemic, and I won't go back, can't go into that about the effects of that. But it was really an engagement project to get people to go to libraries again, to read again. So what the BBC did was to ask a panel of five, it was six, it was then five people, to create a kind of an alternative canon. So the 100 novels that shaped their lives, their world, the books that really impacted upon their perception of the world and how they made decisions, etc. Kit the Wow was one of the panel members, Juno Dawson as well, etc. So it was really quite interesting that the BBC were trying to get people to, actively read again in a context with the de-reading, the kind of the detextualization of our world. There were TV programs, podcasts, broadcasts, all sorts of things were taking place. And what the project did was to kind of cut up the 100 novels by this panel into 10 subcategories. And these are quite important because I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. I can show you what they did. So these were the categories. So they weren't your usual genres, shall we say, like science fiction or kind of literature, but they broken them up into sub themes, which is really quite interesting. So class and society, which I will talk about at length in a second, was looking at how the ideas about class had shaped British society through novels. And I'll tell you a bit about the corpus in a second. There was this category called rule breakers, which kind of looked at experimental literature. And also politics, power, protest, which had, for instance, George Orwell in it, for instance, to understand how literature had been used as a manifesto, a call to arms, shall we say, to mobilize people. So these were the genres that they were thinking about. And we were using the same methodology that we were using in novel perceptions, which is basically a tripartite structure with traditional English literature approaches, close reading, looking at the history of literature. Then we asked the public to engage in psychological surveys, where we asked basically two questions. What do they think the general quality of certain novels, but also what they made of the literary quality? And we wanted to kind of understand the difference between those two measurements. And we didn't explain what we thought literary means, what the definition of literature is. So in that sense, the hidden agenda was to kind of challenge the status of literature, how we have defined literature for over centuries, and therefore also thinking about the canon. And crossing over with those two lines was computational analysis of the 100 novels, looking at novels at sentence length, difficulty, grammatical difficulty, etc., to understand which novels had a certain similarity of style, but that were kind of interpreted completely differently when it comes to, let's say, literary quality. And therefore we can kind of understand a certain bias in the readerly perception of literature. And I'll show you a bit how that kind of works in a second. So, yeah, I'm not going to go into these kind of general details. I will share the PowerPoint after we meet. But it's really interesting to see how some categories had different responses from gender by women, for instance, and also age, how certain novels that were canonical 50 years ago are kind of fading out of our literary system, shall we say. Lots to talk about, but I want to keep it close to our topic, Ishiguro. So one of the things that we looked at, for instance, was sentence length. And there was already a bit of an interesting clue here when we looked at the remains of the day. Ishiguro's Booker Prize winning novel of 1989, of course, because it was close to lots of, let's say, older canonical texts. We got Sir Walter Scott, Frankenstein, Austen, and George Eliot, for instance. So we know, of course, that writing longhand, historically speaking, shall we say, enable people or kind of trigger people to have longer sentences, and this is something that we are kind of interested in as well. So that was quite interesting to see that, and we know, of course, that Ishiguro writes this wonderful prose. This sentence is, I think, 29 words actually, but it's one example of the ways in which Ishiguro's particular style is really about crafting language, about kind of sculpting language, as it were. And this line is just exemplary of how Ishiguro deals with language, and he's able to position the reader through language. This is the anecdote, if you remember, of a tiger slipping into a dining room, and then the butler will ensure, of course, that the tiger will be killed. And then the line runs, dinner will be served at the usual time, and I am pleased to say that there will be no discernible traces left of the recent occurrence by that time. So wonderful cadence, wonderful use of language. And I'm hoping, and I think that Tino and Sara will be able to kind of give us a more of a sense of how that works. I'm really curious what they will say. So, Ishiguro's Remains of the Day was in the category of class and society. As you know, it's about a butler in a grand estate, a mansion, and traveling through the 1930s in the build-up of fascism, and then also looking back from a point of view in 1950s, looking back on that moment. And thinking about some of the mistakes that the butler has made, and quite painful mistakes, shall we say. So in that category, there were a number of novels. Disgrace, Nell Dunn's work was in there. And what we've done here is to use R, the Computational Literary Studies tool, to kind of see if there was any kind of overlap between the different categories that the BBC panel had kind of created. And as you can see, we've color-coded the different categories, and it's a bit of a mess, as you can see. So you can almost conclude that it isn't that certain science fiction novels or novels from a particular category were clustering together. So we may deduce from that the literary style does not necessarily pertain or is associated with a certain kind of theme, as it were. So that was really quite interesting. At the bottom, we do see a number of fantasy novels clustered together, including Kevin Barry's City of Bohane, with Tolkien, etc. So that was really quite interesting. And we think this may have happened because of the use of made-up language, lots of neologisms that turn these novels into outliers. What we can also see, of course, is this interesting kind of overlap or being very close together of Ishiguro's Remains of the Day and Pride and Prejudice. So they are both outliers, but also close together. So what is happening here? We saw that the sentence length could be maybe a contributing factor, and we thought about what other possibilities there are for explaining this proximity of those two novels. And it could, of course, be that the diction of the butler Stevens, who uses an archaic, quite complex diction and register, the butler kind of speak, shall we say, that had an effect on the closeness of Austen and Ishiguro. What we've done here, I should have said, is to look at the 1,000 most frequent words in the corpus, all the 1,000 words that all the books in that corpus share, and then measuring the distance to those words. So what we have here, because usually we start with 100 most frequent words, and that really drills down into the linguistic style, the kind of the grammatical style, how that coheres between different novels. Here we've included many more words. So what we have here as well is that there's more in terms of the semantics that is being included in the analysis. So one could maybe presume that the use of the motor car, the country house, the estate, the butler speak, kind of overlaps maybe with Austen's, let's say, Mansfield Park, etc., and Pride and Prejudice, and those novels set in a similar setting. You can also see, of course, that Ishiguro is clustering with lots of 19th century novels, and of course we all know that Ishiguro is an avowed fan of Victorian novels, also Dostoevsky, for instance. So we need to look at this in more detail, of course, but maybe there is some sort of translation of Ishiguro's reading of those novels and seeping into his own way of writing. And Ishiguro has been acknowledging his love of Austen. He said, "I've learned so much from this profound novelist about nuance, understatement, and technique." So that is interesting, I think. So we need to look more closely into this, and perhaps Tino and Sara can maybe give us a sense of what they found in a second. Just a second part of what we did, we looked at the presence of emotional words in that specific corpus, a corpus of 10 of Class and Society, looking at words with love, hate, anger, horror, etc. And what we can see here is an interesting pattern when we look at, for instance, Dickens, Ishiguro, V.S. Naipaul, and also Coetzee. They hardly use explicit kind of references to emotions, which is quite interesting. And I think when you look at Jean Rhys, it's this section, Why Say Gasso C, and we have Muriel Spark, Prime Miss Jean Brodie over here, and Nell Dunn, Poor Cow, which uses lots and lots of references to the word love. So what it seems to suggest that some women writers are more explicitly using references to emotions, which is quite interesting for the following fact. So we kind of compared Poor Cow by Nell Dunn. It's a 1960s novel set in London, working class London, and compared it to The Remains of the Day, just to see how people perceived it subjectively, and see how their style, etc., was matching. So this is the result for The Remains of the Day. On the left-hand side, you've got the answers to the question, how good did you think this novel was, the general quality of the novel, and then also how literary did you think this novel was. So what we can see here is that Ishiguro scores really well, of course. Everyone thinks the novel is either very good or exceptionally good. And of course, the question is why is that so? Is it just the writing, the language of it, but is it also shaped by external factors like literary prizes and other subsequent meanings, perhaps? So the literary also is kind of really high towards the literary and highly literary. So if you compare this to, here's another Nobel Prize winner, John Coetzee, and The Disgrace, also a Booker Prize winning novel, has a similar pattern. People really like it and also think it's highly literary. But when we come to Poor Cow, this has kind of an opposite kind of result. So people on the whole like it slightly less, although still the majority of people think it's very good, which it is. In fact, it's a great novel actually. Um, and the problem is what we can see with the literary style is really deemed not to be literary at all. So why is that? If you read the novel, you could probably guess this. But these are some of the text comments that the public gave us when thinking about whether they thought it was literary or good. And yeah, so Poor Cow to many people reads more like a social investigation journalism because it talks about sort of abortion and women's rights in the 1960s and the emancipatory process that were taking place around then. And Dunn, who's actually upper class herself, in fact, she took a tape recorder, interviewed working class women, and then turned that into what I think is quite fine prose, a very poetic kind of prose. So there is a problem there with this, what is perceived to be a simple style and an authentic journalistic kind of style, which has a detrimental effect on the assumption of what its literary merits are, shall we say. And these are some comments that the people that we work with gave on Ishiguro's Remains for a Day. And again, there's maybe an indication that the Booker Prize and various other prizes that the novel won have shaped people's perception of the novel's literary qualities. But of course, what we also see is that the majority of people refer to the novel as well written. It's well written, superbly written, etc. So there is a sense of that people really pick up on the language of Ishiguro, but they never go into more detail about why it is so well written. So it's really an interesting tendency, I think. So we need to kind of understand more in more detail what makes the language of literature so special. What does it do to the brain? And also understanding if that is putting us in a position where we can explain what literature is really in a new way. So the problem was for Poor Cow really that the literary diagnosis of the novel is kind of undermined by its raw use of authenticity, its kind of explicit use of emotional language, perhaps, which is associated with maybe not literariness, and yeah, that's one of the problems, and it sort of has a detrimental impact upon its yeah, literary status, shall we say, which is quite ironical. So yeah, so these are some of the conclusions that we were kind of drawing from that, in the sense that excuse me, making use of accents, working class accents, regional accents and dialects, it doesn't stand the writer in good stead because it impacts on people's perception that you're not using RP, etc., etc. And of course, Ishiguro does do that, and the association of posh English is maybe also associated with its literary style. Okay, so I think I think that's it. So what we've done is really preliminary kind of work in a way, and I think Sara and Tino um, have drilled much deeper into the style. So what I think we can do is to hand over to them, if that's okay, Sara and Tino. If you've got any questions, can you put them in the chat, and then we'll come and answer those hopefully towards the end of this session. Sara, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Just as a test.
We can. Yeah.
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 Right, let's try. I don't think I've shared in Teams before. So I'm not sure why it's not. Oh, here it is. Right. Right. Can you see my slides now?
We can.
Yes.
Thank you. That's really great.
Fab. Okay. So I can't see you, so you have to talk to me if you want to indicate anything to me. And Tino, are you here at the moment?
Yes, I am. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Just to let people know that Tino is on childcare duty today, so you might be dipping in and out, right? But
Potentially,
do feel
yeah.
free to feel free to chip in if you're here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I wanted to start off today by saying this is very much a work in progress. So some of the things that we're talking about today, we found out this week, I would say. We're very much in the process of thinking about them. And so we're sharing them with you today in the hope of getting some useful feedback, really, rather than trying to present a finished product. And the corpus research that we want to talk about is part of a book project for Palgrave called The Language of Kazuo Ishiguro. And the book is going to combine cognitive, stylistic, and corpus stylistic approaches to study Ishiguro's language. And so the main research questions that the book's focusing on center around what kind of features are characteristic of Ishiguro's styles, and how Ishiguro uses language to create experiential effects for his readers. The book is going to focus on Ishiguro's 9 major prose works to date, so that there's 8 novels and there's 1 short story cycle that's forming the focus of the book. And what I want to talk about in particular today is the computational strand of the project. It's quite an exploratory approach that we've ended up taking, because we're interested in both Ishiguro's authorial style, so how his style compares with that of other writers and whether he has any linguistic idiosyncrasies. And we're also interested in text style, so that's how the style is functioning to create meanings and effects in particular texts or groups of texts. So what we did was start off by making a corpus of Ishiguro's 9 prose works. And we decided fairly early on that we wanted to separate the narration from the quoted speech in our corpora. That was motivated by an intuitive sense that this might be an interesting thing to do with Ishiguro's novels. And that was inspired by corpus stylistic work, which does the same kind of thing with third-person fiction. I'm thinking here the work of Michaela Malberg and associates on Dickens and 19th century fiction. There's also been recent publications by Eckbert and Malberg that suggest that literature or fiction encompasses 2 registers, narration and speech, and they should be considered distinctively. And also work like Semino and Short that studies speech presentation categories. So we were inspired by that, and we decided to try and separate them in all of our corpora. For our purposes quickly, then. Oh, go on.
Sorry, very quickly. I wasn't sure if the slides were meant to be going forward. We're just stuck on the sort of initial title slide.
Oh no, they should be going forward. That's weird.
Yeah, we're on 3 now, so I think that's the right one.
Are you on 3 now? I think it's better if I don't do it in a slideshow then, isn't it? Maybe. Can you still see the full screen, the full slide?
We can see, yeah, with the overview on the left, but it's not the slideshow as such, no.
I know. I don't know how to do it. Do you think that's better just to do that?
If you go to the bottom right, there is a sliding bar, the plus and minus thing, and the symbol to the left of that will start the slideshow itself. Yeah.
Yeah, but then I just lose you. I can't see you. Okay, let's see if it carries on then. Has the slide changed now? No.
It looks like it's stuck.
Yeah. Can you see one about creating a corpus of Ishiguro's works now? Yeah, I think we might just
We
have
can
to
see
do it
that
in
slide,
those
yeah. So if we just go through them like that, I think it's fine.
Thanks, Tino. Thanks for letting me know.
This works. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we decided that we needed Ishiguro's works in two different formats, in plain text and also XML format. And that enabled us to mark up the quoted speech using XML tags. So, I mean, Tino, you could probably speak to this a bit more, but basically we got the computer to put in tags around anything that was in inverted commas that indicated quoted speech. And that meant that you could then separate the narration from the quoted speech automatically using Oxygen and Python. And then we were able to analyze the output as plain text files in some other corpus tools like AntConc and Sketch Engine and WMatrix 6. And so we were thinking separating narration from quoted speech would allow us to investigate Ishiguro's style in these different modes and hopefully give us sort of a more informative analysis. So in the end, we had sort of 3 separate files for each of Ishiguro's 9 works, a complete version, the quoted speech, and also the narration. And all of them were in plain text format. The Ishiguro corpus adds up to about 860,000 words in total. And in order to make a meaningful comparison between the target corpus and a reference corpus, in order to investigate Ishiguro's style, we decided to create a reference corpus because we found that comparing Ishiguro to something like the BNC or other historical corpora didn't really tell us much about Ishiguro's unique style. It just sort of kept telling us really that he's a contemporary fiction writer who writes in the first person and in the narrative mode, which wasn't really very helpful. So we compiled a reference corpus which aimed to represent serious, I'm doing air quotes here, serious literary fiction by Ishiguro's contemporaries. And we had to balance several factors when choosing the works that were going to be included. First of all, we were thinking about what authors we should include, and we chose to include writers that Ishiguro has been compared to in some way, wherever we could. So either authors he's appeared against in prize long lists and prize short lists, publicity materials, or the kind of writers that literary critics compare Ishiguro to. We also wanted to get a distribution of works. So Ishiguro has been publishing for 40 odd years, so from 1982 to 2021. And we wanted a distribution of works that sort of was balanced with that. We also wanted our reference corpus to have a majority of works in the first person because that reflects the dominant narrative perspective in the Ishiguro corpus. And so in our reference corpus, we have about a 9th, which uses the third person. So basically that balances out The Buried Giant, which is Ishiguro's third person work. We were also, we wanted to be able to easily separate narration and quoted speech. So we restricted ourselves to works that made conventional use of regular punctuation, like inverted commas and italics, for instance. And that meant that we could sort of semi-automate the marking up of the texts for quoted speech and then their separation. And we were also restricted, we restricted ourselves to works that were narrative prose throughout. So our focus on conventional punctuation and narrative prose meant that quite a few experimental contemporary writers that you maybe would hear alongside Ishiguro and that maybe are using first person mode, we couldn't include because we weren't able to process them within the scope of the project. And we didn't want texts that sort of suddenly turn into PowerPoint slides or a play text halfway through, because that was going to mess up our results. So we aimed for the reference corpus to be about 2 to 3 times the size of the Ishiguro corpus, so that we could draw some useful conclusions from it. And the reference corpus has ended up being about 2,480,000 words. So it's about 2.8 times the size of the Ishiguro corpus, of the target corpus. I'm not sure how clear this is going to be because I don't know how zoomed in you are. Is it okay, Tino? Yeah. So this table,
I can read this on my screen.
about, yeah, apologies if anyone is struggling. I might be able to zoom in a little bit. Oh no, that's too much. Right, put it there. So basically this table just gives you an overview of the text that we put in our reference corpus. And I've color coded them to show you the kind of the reasons that motivated their inclusion. So the ones that are tagged green are authors that have appeared in prize shortlists alongside Ishiguro. The ones in orange that are tagged orange are authors that literary critics or publicity materials have compared Ishiguro to. I had to do a sort of survey of the MLA database to get that information. And then the other ones, which are tagged purple, are just sort of prize-winning writers from the relevant period. And sometimes you get a combination of those factors. So you get names in the reference corpus like Coetzee, Winterson, Atwood, Amos, Rushdie, Swift, Mitchell, McEwen, and so on. So this slide shows you, it represents all of the, both of the corpus, so the text from both of the corpus through time. So the axis on the bottom is basically the year from 1980 up to 2021. And you can see the size of the bars represent the number of words that we have from each of those years. And what, like I say, we were trying to balance the chronological distribution of the number of words as best we could. So roughly, we've got a ratio of sort of 1 to 3. So when you put the two corpora together, 25% is Ishiguro's and 75% is the reference corpus. And that's sort of, we tried to keep that ratio for the entire 40-year period. So we were sort of looking at maybe the early 80s, the late 80s, the early 90s, the late 90s, and trying to get that 1 to 3 balance as best as we could with all the other criteria that we had to balance. So, and also considering the narrative perspective of the work, the percentage is just a bit higher. So 31.7% of the two corpora together are in the third person. So we've got The Buried Giant by Ishiguro, The Life and Times of Michael Kay, and The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet in the reference corpus. These are all in the third person. And there were some works like The Moor's Last Sigh that blend first and third person modes that we included. But overall, we're sort of happy that we managed to balance the reference corpus as best as we could. And before talking in any more detail about specific corpus linguistic or stylometric analyses, we wanted to get a feel of some of the main differences between the Ishiguro corpus and the reference corpus. And as you can see in this graph, we noticed straight away that large parts of Ishiguro's works consist of quoted speech as opposed to narration. So this bar chart, you've got Ishiguro's 9 novels along the bottom. The blue bar shows how many words of narration there is, and the red bar shows how many words of direct speech there is in each of the novels. And so the average across Ishiguro's novels is for them to be made up of roughly 41% of direct speech. And there are some outliers there as well. So if you look at A Pale View of Hills, The Unconsoled, and The Buried Giant, for instance, they have actually have more quoted speech than narration. When you look at the narration and quoted speech in the reference corpus, you can see here the numbers are much lower. So the blue bars showing narration for each of these works in the reference corpus are generally much higher than the red bars, which are showing the amount of quoted speech. And so in the reference corpus, there's about 21% of the novels tend to be quoted speech. The only outliers in the reference corpus that are comparable to Ishiguro are, again, David Mitchell's The Thousand Autumns, which comes in at 49% quoted speech, and also China Mayville's The City, which is 43% quoted speech. The other works have percentages that range from just 2.5% in The Enigma of Arrival to 32.5% in A Month in the Country. And so the average overall is about 21%. So what we could tell straight away from these bar charts is that Ishiguro seems to use more quoted speech in his works than the reference corpus, like roughly twice as much on average is in Ishiguro. Another interesting thing, another interesting difference between the two corpora concerns the type token ratio, which is a number that tells you something about the lexical richness or the diversity of the novels. And we carried out MATTR, so moving average type token ratio scores. And this slide shows sort of the column of a table. And as you can see, Ishiguro's novels are largely restricted to the bottom half of this list. And they're highlighted in green here. And that indicates that his works are, generally speaking, less lexically diverse or less rich or less complex or maybe more repetitive compared to the reference corpus. For a bit of context, the numbers that you can see here, apparently a typical English text, which we're not really sure exactly what that refers to, but a typical English text would tend to have a size of about 0.6 if your window size is 500 words. So here you can see Ishiguro's texts are ranging from 0.5 to 0.47. Okay, so by exploring the corpora using corpus linguistic tools, including AntConc, Sketch Engine, and W-Matrix 6, we also have some interesting, we think, preliminary findings. So these are the things that this list on this slide are things that were standing out in the Ishiguro corpus as being particularly key when compared with the reference corpus. So the use of honorifics, titles like Mr., Sir, Miss, comes up as key in Ishiguro's works, both in the narration and the quoted speech sections of the corpora. In the quoted speech of Ishiguro, we had use of a variety of adverbs, and also the personal pronoun I is key in his quoted speech, along with verbal contractions, things like I'm, you'll, it's. And when looking at the narration parts of the corpora, Ishiguro uses words indicating chronological linearity significantly more. So chiefly things like then, but also again and eventually. And also verbs of speech in the past tense were coming up as key, so like said and continued. The key parts of speech and also semantic concept analyses that we did in W-Matrix 6 also confirmed what we were finding in the keywords. So again, honorifics were coming up as key in both speech and narration. And we also got adverbs coming up. The parts of speech in W-Matrix gave us a bit more detail and precisely what types of adverbs seem to be key in Ishiguro. We can see adverbs introducing appositional constructions and also quasi-nominal adverbs of time in particular. Yeah, in the key concepts, again, degree boosters were often adverbs, and we could see a preoccupation with linear order and time again. And we actually also flipped the analysis in W-Matrix. So we tried to look for the key concepts in the reference corpus when compared to the Ishiguro corpus. And what happened then was that we found that more sort of tangible or topic or content related concepts were coming up as being key in the reference corpus. So things like death or religion or geographical place. Whereas what comes up as significant in the Ishiguro corpus tends to be more abstract, less topic or place specific. So things like linear order, time and degree. Okay. Before carrying on with our corpus analyses, we also decided to have a look at what Stylo would tell us about all the works in both of the corpora to get a sense of their relationships. And we were also interested in whether Stylo could tell us anything about the relationships between Ishiguro's works. So throughout his career, Ishiguro has published novels that have received a sort of a shocking departure from his previous style, or other novels that are seen as more of a continuation of his style. So we were interested in whether Stylo could give us any perspective on sort of the groupings of Ishiguro's works as well. The statistical analyses in Stylo, as I'm sure you guys know, are generally used to help attribute anonymous texts to certain authors, but it can also be used to observe how similar or dissimilar certain works are by looking at the most frequent words and carrying out various statistical tests. So without going into too much technical detail, here are some interesting things that we observed in the Stylo. So
is there a possibility to zoom in on the image? I'm just aware that it's tricky on my screen, and I have a pretty big screen, so maybe for others.
Sure. Yeah. Let me try. If I just share my entire screen, would that work? Oh, it's not yet. Share.
You've unshared now, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me just go into it in this for now and zoom in like this. Is that a little bit clearer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have got another slide that zooms in. So what you're looking at from this perspective is this is all of the text in the reference corpus and also all of Ishiguro's texts. And what you're getting here is a clear distinction between, I've zoomed in here on this slide. Sorry. So in the bottom left-hand corner, the text in blue are all Ishiguro's works, which seem to be clustering together. As you would expect, it's showing that he has a sort of a distinctive, identifiable style. The only outlier is the Buried Giant, which is appearing on another branch paired up with another text, which I'll mention later. But otherwise, all of Ishiguro's works are being grouped together. And the same kind of thing can be seen, I don't know how this is, let's try like that, on this kind of multi-dimensional scaling diagram. And as well also on principal components analysis. So again, Ishiguro's works are in blue on the bottom right hand side here, and you can see that the works in the reference corpus are sort of clustering together on the other side of the diagram. I've got another a little zoom in there so you can see the position of the Ishiguro novels there. We've just got one more diagram to show you as well. So as well as, but because we have multiple files for each novel, remember, in the Ishiguro corpus and in the reference corpus, so we've got a plain text of the whole novel, and we also have just the quoted speech and just the narration for each of the every single novel that we're studying. We can take this one step further and sort of look at a consensus tree for everything to see if Ishiguro's style is more grounded in his narration or his quoted speech. And I'm just going to get up not that one. Get up an image of this. So I don't know, how's that looking in terms of zoom to, Tino? Can you see it okay? Or I'll zoom in a minute.
Yeah, maybe zoom in a bit more, but I think one or two clicks should probably do it, at least on my screen.
So basically what this consensus tree is showing is like all of the files that we have for all of the novels, and it's quite a cluttered diagram, but it's also quite interesting in some ways as well. So as you can see, things are becoming a bit more muddled here, but there is still a distinct Ishiguro branch here on this side of the diagram, grouping together texts like When We Were Orphans, The Unconsoled, Artist of the Floating World, Pale View of Hills, Remains of the Day, and Clara and the Sun. But interestingly, over this side of the diagram, we found that Nocturnes and Never Let Me Go were being put together on a separate branch. So they're sort of distinct, but they're off on the same branch together and away from his other novels. There's also a separation between his quoted speech and his narration. So we've got some strands in this consensus tree that are grouping together the speech in some of Ishiguro's novels. So Remains of the Day, Artist, Pale View of Hills, The Unconsoled, and When We Were Orphans. Their quoted speech is grouping together. And at the bottom here, we have a group of the quoted speech in Never Let Me Go, Nocturnes, and Clara and the Sun. So overall, we think this overview raises some quite interesting questions in terms of like why these texts are being grouped as being more being grouped up with each other. And besides that grouping of Nocturnes and Never Let Me Go, we also see An Artist of the Floating World and When We Were Orphans pairing up quite often across various statistical measures. And also we have The Buried Giant pairing up here with a text called Morality Play by Brian Unsworth, which is also, well, we think that this might be because both of them are set in medieval times, and so there may be something in their historical style that is motivating their connections. What we plan to do next then is basically run some further comparisons of these groupings against the rest of his works to try and understand the linguistic features that are motivating their connections in stylo. We've looked at nocturnes and Never Let Me Go this week, and using Sketch Engine, and we've found that when you start looking at it, there's nocturnes and Never Let Me Go seem to use more contracted verb forms than Ishiguro's other works. And they also make use of verbs like was and were as opposed to have and has. And yeah, that's as far as we've got with it at the moment. And it's starting to suggest really interesting things about the worldview and the register that the narrators are using in those novels. But yeah, we need to do more work on this. But that's pretty much where we're up to at the moment, I'd say.
Really wonderful, Sara and Tino, wonderful work, really amazing, raising new questions as well, I think. So do we have any questions for Sara and Tino on their presentation?
Or you know,
or
brutal
comments or feedback,
but basically saying, no, you're all doing it wrong, do something different. You know, this is all very exploratory, so yeah, any feedback would be great, obviously.
Well, we talked a little bit over summer about the creation of the reference corpus, I guess, and and what you're seeing in the stylometric measurements is relational. So if you change one text, things shift, etc. So you're just wondering if you want to do like create another corpus and compare it again, if that's maybe as a control, shall we say? I'm not sure if you thought of that, but.
Yeah, it's something. It would be really nice if we could use a few other corpora similar, but potentially, you know, not to the exact same parameters as you say, as a control group, not just for some of the sort of stylometric analyses, but also for the type token ratio sort of scores that you were getting, or the percentage of quoted speech, because again, it could be something particular of our reference corpus, but we're obviously then looking at an issue of time that is available to us to sort of do these things. Yeah. But it is definitely worth doing. Yeah.
I'm obviously an Ishiguro nerd, but there's lots to kind of talk about. Do you know how he writes? Has he shifted from, let's say, longhand to typewriter to word processor, and have you thought about sort of technology and how that may impact upon the writing style? Because of course there's the Texas kind of archive that you could explore as well, looking at drafts, etc. Anyway.
Well, no, I thought it was really interesting. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the connection, well, the possible connection between older writers and Ishiguro, was that he was writing in longhand. That hadn't occurred to me, and I unfortunately haven't had the chance to go to Texas, so I haven't seen them. Haven't seen them close up, so I don't know if there is anyone here who has that information. Then that would be great. I don't know how he writes now.
I think I know one or two people who visited the archive, the Harry Ransom archive. I mean, I'm just wondering.
The papers that I've seen that are looking at things from the archives, I'm thinking of work of like Enora Lessinger and people like that who've looked at. She studied Ishiguro's writing and redrafting process, and it seems like there is quite a lot of interesting evidence in the archives of him redrafting very carefully paragraphs, scenes, words, so that to the point where you can do a really interesting analysis of what he's taking out and what he's leaving in. So I would say that even if he generates the text by a certain method, longhand or on a computer, whatever, I feel like the evidence in the archive suggests that there's lots of editing and redrafting that goes on in order to really shape his prose. So I think that there must be a sort of craft element involved in the decisions that end up making it into the final publications as well, I would say. And I'd be interested in that. He seems so aware of what he's trying to get the readers to do. I mean, you were saying that in your talk. So I thought, yeah, I feel like it's going to be deliberate in some respects as well.
Yeah. Like no other, I think Ishiguro is aware of not just putting stuff on the page, but having that kind of imagination to understand what the effect of it will be when the reader consumes those words on the page and what the effects will be. So I think, yeah, I mean, loads of things. What is the role of editors, etc. We're in a different project that we're also using stylometry for, which is about sort of acquired brain injury. We want to also work with text produced by people who've suffered a brain injury, for instance. But you need to get back to the original source. There's all these layers that media and outputs that they kind of mediate and then muddles the output. So okay, are there any other questions? Just wondering what we made of the presentation. It's very complex, and particularly if you haven't used those tools that I have been showing and Sarah and Tino have been using as well. So are you now cross-checking it with a close reading of certain novels as well, just to go back and let the human brain do its work?
Yeah, well, just to say, if there's anything that you want me to go over again, or we haven't explained, ask those questions too, because we're very happy to. We're sort of still experimenting with some of the tools ourselves. So yeah, we're happy to talk about them in a bit more detail. And in response to that question, Bas, about whether we are going back to, yes, we are, because the book's trying to take a cognitive and a corpus approach to Ishiguro. So we want it to. I'm really interested in the machine reading the texts and the perspective that gives you, but then also linking it back to the way human minds read the text too. So that's very much the plan.
Yeah, it was really, really fascinating, and it's not surprising, I think, when you show, I think it was the PCA analysis that Ishiguro clusters together by himself, and you can see that with various writers that we've been working on as well. Ali Smith, her style is very kind of unique and true to herself, basically. She always clusters together, which is really quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and we were interested in that because once we made those diagrams, we were like, oh, that's interesting. Well, it knows, it can tell it's Ishiguro, great. But then we're like, is that the same for all novelists, or is that, so it's useful to have that information that Ali Smith seems to do the same thing.
Sorry, I was going to say, ideally we'd have multiple works of the authors that we've included in the reference corpus as well, because obviously we have, I think at the moment, one work per author, to have a diverse group of authors with different backgrounds writing about different things from different periods. But if you can get more works from them, presumably for most of them, whichever stylometric analysis you sort of carry out, they will recognize the styles, with some shifting in groups depending on where you set your limits. But that would be also something really nice to do. Again, time is a bit of an issue there, but that should be that should be useful too. Yeah.
Can we remember? We've got a bit of time. I'll block like 2 hours. Not sure why, but I'll let you go.
Well, I think there's a question.
Yeah, that's right.
And Benjamin's got his hand up as well.
Sorry. So is it because of publisher restrictions?
I think Tess's questions about
Tess, that's about. So when you do analysis with these tools, you need to turn, as you know, all text into readable texts, and we know that often there are kind of sources out there which, of course, we are not using, where you can get like EPUBs and that kind of thing, and it becomes ethically a bit of a muddle when academics are kind of cribbing resources from the web and not acknowledging that. So what we've done is to inform the publisher and as long as they acknowledge that the project exists and they contribute to it, then that's all fine. So it's not so much about publisher restrictions, because what we do as academics, I think I've got no problem with doing analysis on text. So it's not like Faber where you can only use 500 words or something like that. So yeah, because we use obviously all the text. Who's got a hand up? Can't see that.
Ben Colbert.
Oh, Ben,
Benjamin
yeah,
Colbert.
Ben, can you pose your question, please?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for a really fascinating talk, Sara and Tino. I'm just actually interested in a little bit more information or your speculations on that RStudio image where one of the Ishiguro texts wasn't clumped with Ishiguro but was off with somebody else. And that seemed very interesting and quite a bit of an anomaly, but I'd just be curious to know a little bit more about your speculations on why that is and what that means.
Yeah, so in that final diagram, I think it was The Buried Giant that's paired off with a text called Morality Play by, I think it's Barry Unsworth.
Yeah.
That, I can't remember when it was published. Was it 90s, mid-90s, maybe? When I looked into that in a bit more detail, I think the thing that was uniting the works was the fact that they're set in the medieval period. So The Buried Giant obviously is that story of Axel and Beatrice traveling through this sort of Arthurian era in British history. And Morality Plays is set in a similar time, set in the 14th century. And I think even a morality play is in fact a medieval genre as well of some kind. So we haven't gone to the other corpus tools to like look at what's key about those two texts versus the reference corpus yet. But my hunch is going to be that it's sort of maybe archaic lexis or archaic syntax, but I don't know. Tino is the historical linguist.
Potentially, yeah. The other thing that I thought was interesting to see, because The Buried Giant was off on its own in the initial consensus tree where we just look at that text as a whole. We initially were like, hang on, this could obviously be due to the change in perspective, it being third person rather than first person, but it wasn't grouped together with the other third person works that we had included in the reference corpus. So it's something different from that, it seems. And when we created the big messy consensus tree, sort of separating narration and quoted speech, it was interesting that The Buried Giant's narration is grouped together with the rest of Ishiguro's work, but its quoted speech is grouped together with Morality Play. So it seems to be that, you know, and again, it makes me think about the style of an author can be different depending on what type of perspective you look at in the novel itself, the narration bits or the quoted speech bits. Because the characterization that Ishiguro does with the characters in his works can vary to such an extent that will be put together with different authors, whereas the narration itself, at least Stylo seems to think as, that is clearly Ishiguro because it's grouped together with the rest. So it makes us think as well about what parts of a novel to look at when it comes to the unique style or a departure even from that unique style. So yeah, that's just more to look at, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense for the dialogue parts of a novel to be the places where an author, in a sense, leaves his or her own style behind and tries to imitate the style of the characters. And if that be in another historical period, then you're trying to imitate medieval speech, as it were. That would be the thing. So that's kind of interesting. So in a sense, if we're looking for we have kind of two authorial styles. We have the authorial style in which he or she is largely known for,
Yeah.
which would be associated with the narrative. And then there's the kind of the authorial style of imitating other styles,
Yeah.
which might fit along with the speech patterns. That's
Yeah,
really interesting.
absolutely.
Thank you.
We see the same, just as an afterthought of that as well. We see that the quoted speak sections by Ishiguro also tend to group with other quoted speak sections of his own work. So Clara and the Sun tends to be grouped together with Nocturnes and Never Let Me Go, saying something about potentially Ishiguro using a similar style for the characterizations in those works. Whereas I think it was Remains of the Day, Art of the Floating World, The Unconsoled, those, the other works are all grouped together again. So again, it tells you something about Ishiguro potentially leaning on previous sort of used styles in other novels for characters and reusing that in a different context. And then Stylo picking up on that. But potentially that's something to look at. So yeah. It's just it raises more questions basically the further we look into it, but
All
yeah,
to
it's
the good.
interesting.
Thank you very much.
I seem to remember that the Berry Giant gave Ishiguro the most trouble in terms of. I remember him saying this, finding the voice of the characters, because of course it's set in like medieval times, and it took him a very long time to arrive at the specific kind of speech that Beatrice, etc., have. Because it's not straight kind of medieval ways of speaking, I guess, right? So it's kind of like a faux version of that. So it imitates it at a different kind of level. So, but it took him a very long time to figure out how to do that. So I think it's something to really look into. So, and just to go back to one of your key findings. So if I correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that Ishiguro has more quoted speech, more direct speech than other writers. So what's the implication of that? Is there more conversation in there? Is there more? How does that work? Or I'm just trying to understand what the implication of that is. So the characters are more to the foreground rather than the authorial voice.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to point out is that the way that we separated the quoted material from the narration, it was quite a blunt tool in a way. So basically anything that's in inverted commas or indicated by punctuation to be a quote of some kind will have been pulled out by the automated tagging. And they've been carefully checked, all of the documents and everything, but it does mean that we stopped calling it a direct speech corpus, because most of it is direct speech, but some of it is going to be some scare quotes or anything that appears, anything that's quoted that's where the punctuation is indicating that the voice of the narrator is establishing some distance or shift from it. So that means we can't make any claims about direct speech as a category from based on the text that we've got. But like I say, most of the time it does seem to indicate that there's either direct or free direct speech being represented. And I don't know. I'd be interested to know what other people think about that finding that Ishiguro seems to use more dialogue, essentially, or quotation in his novels than other contemporary writers. Because I found it quite surprising. I don't know if I'd noticed that.
Because you're thinking of interiority, I guess, right? So, but is it more? You associate Ishiguro also with more interiority, I guess. Right, so,
yeah. And I feel like his narrators have received a lot of attention. His narrative voices, and you think about him I think about him as a first person writer, and having unreliable narration, and that that's really foregrounded in my sort of understanding of his style. But then I was surprised at it made, well, like I say, we had a hunch that the dialogue was playing a role, but I think it seems that it's quite significant in the way that he's creating his effects. And for me, that's interesting, because people often talk about Ishiguro as being very indirect. So they talk about his works having a surface and a depth. They talk about them needing a lot of inferencing from the reader, and things like live dialogue also require that kind of inferencing and sort of filling in. So I'm wondering if that's the amount of dialogue is playing into these impressions that readers have.
Yeah. And is it more theatrical because it's more about sort of people speaking like on a stage or something? I don't know. It's super interesting. So yeah.
well, the weird thing about it is that in a lot of the novels, it is about interiority, right? And you have narrators remembering scenes from their past and recounting the direct speech to you in great detail.
That's right.
It seems,
even though impossible.
They're telling you their memory most of the time. And so, I mean, James Phelan has written about this in the use of dialogue in first-person narration, and how it's a bit of it's like a trick that authors are doing it, that the characters can't really have remembered all of that dialogue verbatim, but you allow that implausibility to just drift into the background because it's a way of the author communicating information to you about what's going on. And so I think it links into that kind of thing, and it just seems like Ishiguro is using that more than I had anticipated.
It's a suspension of disbelief as well, isn't it? So in the opening scenes of The Unconsoled, when you're in the elevator, which takes about half an hour to get to floor whatever 5, etc. So he plays around with that, definitely. Are there any other questions from our attendees? Any thoughts, any questions, any contributions? Just wondering if you
and if anyone was or was not surprised by that finding, I would be interested to know. If there's someone sitting there going, obviously he's got more dialogue than everyone else, I'd like to know.
I guess the question is, so why is he using more dialogue, but it doesn't seem that he's using more dialogue? So what's the effect? Because it's often embedded, I guess, in like a memory or retroactive narration. So
it'd be interesting as well. I'm just thinking out loud now to see. I'm not sure how we go about sort of looking at this from an automated perspective, because it would take a lot of time to do it manually, is to see how often Ishiguro shifts from his narrative sort of style to quoted speech and then back again, because there is a lot of going back and forth from what I remember, extracting the quoted speech, and you are left with a narration that is mostly tiny chunks. There's no big pieces of narration. There are a few here and there, but it'd be interesting to see if that switch from one to the other, if that is significantly more or less than, for example, in the reference corpus, because again, it plays with that boundary of letting the characters speak for themselves versus unreliable narrator sort of thing. I'll look into seeing if that's something I can sort of pick up on, if I can somehow semi-automate this process, or if anyone knows and has experience with this, to let me know, because that might actually also tell us quite a bit about how Ishiguro blurs those boundaries potentially.
And have you looked at the use of distinctive words in different characters as speech? Because I presume you've tagged all the characters, the protagonists, etc. Can you cluster all the dialogue of "oh no" together and compare that to Stevens, whatever?
That would be really, really nice, obviously, because we can look at it per character rather than novel. But we haven't tagged for characters very often, because the number of times where a character is established by name and that's then subsequently followed by a pronoun referencing to another person doing the speech. I'm wondering how one would go about doing that, if not manually, which again just takes just a lot of time.
I think it would be manual, wouldn't it?
On the other hand, I think to be 95% and above certain that you've allocated the quoted speech to the right characters. But then again, it could be worth in the future to think about a case study on one of his novels to do that, which is more feasible, I think, than looking at everything. But it's a good, that's interesting.
I'm thinking of the distinctiveness for, let's say, writers will have like a protagonist or a couple of protagonists who are central. They've got minor characters. They receive less attention. But I'm wondering at the level of linguistic complexity, presumably the minor characters have less distinctive words, and their words cluster slightly more together. One would think. Anyway, so it sounds like an interesting maybe experiment, and maybe you could put Ono in conversation with Stevens. That'd be quite fun between different books.
Well, especially because the quoted speech in quite a few of his novels seem to have echoes of each other. You're like,
absolutely,
yeah.
What's
going on with that? I know. Yeah. It's tricky because you have to make decisions, don't you? And we were trying to get at some of the sort of idiosyncrasies or the things about Ishiguro's style across groups of novels or his whole output, rather than digging really into text style. But I agree that would be a really interesting thing to do.
But so what you want to do, so distinctiveness, but you need to do some. So there's two ways. So if you cull at 100% and use 100%, 100 most frequent words, then you get sort of to the linguistic cadence and the grammar, the style, I guess, of how they speak. And then we open up the corpus or the number of words, you can see if they're using the same words and which words, etc. So, and of course, when you look at sort of Ono and Stephen, it'd be quite messy because of the cultural differences. We got a question in the chat by Sara. Is there a relationship between the number of characters, I suppose the size of the narrative universe, and the amount of dialogue? I wonder if there's an increase in dialogue owing to the smaller cast of characters and therefore more intimate or in-depth interpersonal interaction. Do the novels in the comparative corpus, the reference corpus, have a similar size of cast? So yeah, the number of characters who would be in a position to offer speech, etc. I guess that's one of the questions Sarah's asking.
That's a really good question, and I haven't thought about that, but we could do that. That's something we could do.
That is something we.
But then it's like, it's differentiating between main. You have to identify main characters, I suppose, maybe.
It'd be relatively easy to say, right, we've got X number of characters, main characters in this novel, who are then likely to contribute to the vast majority of quoted speech that we have. What Bas was hinting at before as well, there are going to be characters as well who are, who have some quoted speech in there who will not be a main character. That's something we could account for by going through the novels again, I guess, which again, a case study might prove useful there on a single novel, but maybe even just finding the main characters for the novel, including the reference corpus, that would be feasible, and simply correlate that, assuming, I think it's a fair assumption that accounts for the majority of the quoted speech. That's a good point. Thank you for that comment / question.
That's Sara. Anyway, she's starting a PhD with us, and she's also interested in tagging up novels, so she'll be in touch with you. It would be interesting to see. So, I mean, are there specific protagonists who don't have a lot of voice, shall we say, versus protagonists who do have lots of kind of things to say? They're present verbally, etc. Much more. Anyway, lots of questions, lots of potential, I think, but it's in Ishiguro is usually kind of a small cast in a way, isn't it? It's quite a small
thinking about that. So like Pale View of Hills is quite a small cast. Well, there's lots of bit parts that are mentioned, but in terms of the characters speaking, but that one had more or equal direct speech and narration, if not a bit more quoted speech, because and I think Ishiguro said about that he feels like he he's not balancing the dialogue that well. It's almost reads like a play text at times. There's scenes where she's talking to her father-in-law, the narrator, and that's just vast swathes of sort of direct speech, essentially. That was one of the novels that made me first realize, I think, wow, that's a lot of quoted speech going on. Why maybe we should look into that a bit more. But then something like The Unconsoled, there's tons of characters in that, and they're all he's meeting lots of officials and journalists and various other versions of himself and things. So, but that also had more quoted speech. More quoted speech than narration. So, yeah. It's a good question.
Just comparing the number of characters in each novel might show us that Ishiguro tends to vary a lot with that kind of character setting, if you will, which again might contribute to people making that claim of like, oh, this is a massive departure from, you know, previous works, because they might have felt more intimate to the readers due to a smaller cast. Whereas, because that's another thing. And I'm not sure how well it came across. I'm just thinking of this now. We had one, where is it? We did some principal component analysis and some multidimensional scaling. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen.
I think you can. Should be all right.
Oh yeah, it's all right. Is that legible?
If you could make it slightly bigger, Tino. Yeah. What are we looking at here?
It's
3,000.
Yeah, this is the we've done the same for 500 words, 1,000 words. We've sort of varied here and there, but it tends to be the same for those who can't read it. But basically, the blue works on the writer Ishiguro. This is the text as a whole, as opposed to narration or quoted speech. And we tended to notice that across these axes, Ishiguro tends to be on one side compared to the reference corpus, but he also covers a much larger area on the other axis compared to the reference corpus, sort of indicating that he both has his unique style that makes him stand out from other works, but still has sort of a wide range across which his style sort of is distributed, if that makes sense. I'm still not 100% sure what the axes in an MDS sort of graph, and the same for principal component analysis, what they represent. But compared to what I'm seeing with what we're seeing with the reference corpus, is that Ishiguro's works tend to be distinct enough for Stylo to pick up on his unique style, but then they do still cover sort of a large amount of ground within the graph itself. Save this pair of Nocturnes and Never Let Me Go that, you know, tends to show up a lot together. So we thought that was quite interesting as well.
I think you're muted, Beth. I think you're on mute.
No, so the Buried Giant again having an overlap with a couple of novels. I can't really read them, but yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It tends to be the Buried Giant that is, at least when you look at the text as a whole, that tends to be the one that stands out a bit closer to, in this case, Every Man's for Himself or McEwen's Machines Like Me, but it tends to be slightly off. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Fantastic. Any other questions? Are there any other questions from our attendees? Any comments, feedback?
I guess one thing I was wondering about, that's a question to you, but also anyone else who's worked with sort of using, you've said this before about remains of the day, looking at sentence length. Wondering if that's something, because I know that the remains of the day has more words per sentence on average than his entire corpus does, but haven't looked at the individual works. And again, I'm wondering, thinking back to your comment about the sort of the technological background of how these novels are created would contribute to that. So if other people have experience using sentence length sort of as an indicator of style, because yeah, I'm wondering if that's useful for us, Sarah, to sort of pursue as well, or if other people have suggestions on that.
It's one factor to kind of chase, I think, with regard to like stylometric analysis that uses tokens in a way, isn't it? So not necessarily to do with the sentence length, but it does explain maybe the cadence and the feel of how a novel operates. Obviously, the most kind of famous example is Proust, I guess, right? So, so being able to kind of take the reader on a journey with longer sentences without it feeling like they're long sentences, and I think that there's something there, I guess, and and maybe cognitively it poses different challenges for a reader. These longer sentences. So I don't know. And I'm wondering when Ishiguro was writing Remains, whether he's consciously sort of looking for those longer sentences. I'm just wondering how that creative process kind of works. If he was immersing himself in Woodhouse and Austen just to get the kind of the countryside, whatever vibe. So was it a conscious thing, or was he influenced by reading specific things at that certain time, at the level when he was composing the book, etc.? So
Ted Crosby in the chat also confirmed that it's might be worth looking at, so that's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Tess. Wonderful. I realize we have been here for about 90 minutes. Are there any other questions, remarks, feedback on our presentations, or any other inspiration that people have taken from this and want to do other forms of analysis? Okay. I think we can maybe leave it at that. Yeah, that's right. Wonderful. Okay, so thank you, Sara. Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking out time, Tino and Sara, to share this wonderful research with us. Any further questions? Anything, Pete? You're back on the screen? Oh, okay, fine. That's great. So I want to thank. Yeah. Go
also,
on.
just if anyone ever thinks of anything after the fact, obviously, because people might be getting a bit, tired now of hearing about what we've been doing. If you think of anything else later on, feel free to sort of get in touch. Yeah, send an email or whatever. Obviously, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and hope to be at Parlour as well next year. I intend to be there, so catch up with some people there, if not before.
Yeah. Hopefully that'd be fantastic. Maybe we can offer a workshop together. So like I'm saying, the Wolverhampton team is offering a Computational Literary Studies training school again at Parlour, the 7th and 8th of July next year at Aston University. So I want to thank a couple of people, Ben Colbert, who is here, my co-director of my research centre, Tino, Sara, Pete, thank you for checking out my kind of work that I presented today. And it's great. Thank you so much for being here. I'll be in touch about new research seminars in the near future. But that's it. Can we have a round of applause for Sara and Tino? Thank you very much. Great stuff.
Yeah, and thank you for organising and sort of bringing everything together, obviously.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks
Really
very
wonderful.
much. Thanks very much for having us. Yeah.
Okay, but it's wonderful.